Justice Anthony Mugenyi. Now, ministers have been running on lately. This week, I've been looking at the rise of different ideas into the news forum, still related onto the news aspect. I want to so much welcome you so much for joining me lately, and this is the World Today on TV1. I want to start with the development story on the fuel prices. Now, the government of Uganda has moved to claim onto the public concerns onto the lately released over fuel accountability, still in the relation of confirming national security over public supply that remains stable and insufficient into the redundancy. Now, this comes after the despite control of recent reports and shortages in some areas. Now, different reports report that in a joint statement that was released onto the May of 2021-2022, we're looking at the Ministry of Health and Energy have so much together into the Uganda's national movement into the oil supply as related to the company. Now, this has provided so much significant details onto different supports and assurances as of April 20th. Now, Uganda held approximately, we're looking at 70.5 million of liters of petrol, enough to run at least 19 days of the tenure. We're looking at 43.2 million still of diesel, covering about 12 days, and in the relation of 32 million still of jet fuel, which provides a much longer of 53 days into the tenure. Now, authorities say that these stock prices are within normal operations and range from the country, especially we're looking at considerations that Uganda relies heavily on imported petroleum over products. Now, mainly transported through Kenya, we're looking at different ports of Mombasa and delivered directly to via roads into the pipeline system still in Uganda. Now, furthermore, we relate so much onto different government amenities that have confirmed largely additional shipments that have already been on the way over. We're looking at over 183 million liters of petrol and 253 million liters of diesel expected still in the tenure of the petrol industry. We're looking at May-June supply. Now, this comes into readily into the government's tenure to at least caution onto public concerns on petrol fuel and further onto different discoveries that are into the tenure. Now, we move to more developmental stories still in our docket. Now, away from petrol, we are looking at the controversy of the law of sovereignty. Now, lately on different concerns, different legal experts have come out to negotiate over the law of sovereignty into the bill of 2026. Now, the Uganda Law Society has launched a strong and detailed attack on the proposal of the protection of the sovereignty bill that was stated 2026, describing it as a constitutional coup into the directorate. Now, over the 2026 described as the foundation of different governance as Uganda alters away from the system of governance in relation. Now, different movements still under the tenure. We look at the statement that was released on April 20th under the sovereignty leadership, including President Isaac Semakade and Vice President Anthony Asimwe, that so much guarded and urged the bill as representatives still on the attempt of a shift of power away from the constraints of the foundation to the executive themselves. Now, at the core of these concerns come in and lately after still as a principle of sovereignty itself to furthermore have different continuers and the 1995 Constitution of Uganda still in a relation that belongs to people and exercise the belongings further onto democratic institutions in the law or power that urges different ideas to be put in place if the law is passed, and will be so much redefining government principles in practice of governance, and after giving out authorities broad onto different statements that are significant to the memorandum. Now, one of the most serious legal arguments released lately at the article over 260 of the Constitution, which requires national referendum before fundamental changes to govern the structures still under the US cell, that says the bill attempts to bypass requirements effectively alternating from the Constitution itself and principles that require direct public interaction and consent over the sovereignty bill. Now, that covers it for the sovereignty bill, and more expectations still run out on how to expect public participation still on sovereignty itself, and includes different ideas and amenities that relate to the tenure in that correspondency. And we're looking at different government institutions that have come out to relate so much and debate, and now different states of stages from what many of them admire onto different constitutions and to political consent on how the lawmakers and legal experts and citizens overweigh national security and concerns against preservation. We're looking at democratic governance and furthermore on institutional requirements. Now that covers it for Serenity. We're looking at more stories lately. Now we're crossing over to Nigeria, where we're looking at different ideas into the relation of 6 people being charged over treason for plotting a coup over intimidation onto the current president. Now, in recent reports, we're looking at authorities in Nigeria having formally charged 6 individuals with treason and terrorism. We're looking at related offenses in the relation to governance in what officials describe as a plot overthrowing the current president. We're looking at Bola Tinubu into the relation. Now, charges have been filed before the court itself as a federal high court in this relation of Nigeria and Abuja, outlining different 13 court charges onto this relation and different governance that relate on this and how things are shifting. Now, this includes allegations by treason. You're looking at terrorism and financing of different money laundering, and prosecutors claim this has come into different news that have caused prosecutions over pursuit and levy war against the state itself and undermines authority of the president inclusive. Now we're looking at the charges that include mixed military security and security over civilians, among which we're looking at Major General Muhammad Ibrahim at the center of it all. We're looking at the Navy captain, we're looking at Victor, and police officer Ahmed Ibrahim, still in that relation with other civilians, including Omar. We're looking at Bak, Kushema, and others, still Bakar Sain, still in that tenure. Now, prosecutors have so much alleged that the group was so much involved in coordinating activities that related to aiming and destabilizing the government in 2 different financial networks, and logistic plans have come out in that relation to distribute the outcomes on part of case in the court itself. Now, different investigations have been so much put into the allegations. We're looking at plot dates and 5th of October 2025 with different rumors since the possible change of circulations. Now, at the time, we're looking at authorities have so much dismissed claims and different concerns onto the escalations, and after Nigeria's 65 report on deaths and how things are seemingly circulating onto the anniversary of the related invoice. Now, abruptly, we're looking at the lockdown and scandals have so much been questioning how about an underlying security itself in different renewals on how to commemorate this idea, and we're looking at the push of July 2025. Now, the government has finally confirmed the investigations are still underway, and we're looking at the possibility of evaluating and leading to arrests, and finally, charges now will be before the court to suggest on what will be done in that relation. We're looking at more developments still and new stories that are coming in, and most of it to come in with respect to Nigeria, still inclusive. Now, crossing over to what happened in Equatorial Guinea. Now we're following the Pope's journey, 11-day tour to Africa. Now we cross over to Equatorial Guinea, where we see the Pope visiting Prison Bata, still in relation to spread the good news of human rights in that relation to Africa inclusive. Now, in recent reports, we are having the Pope visiting the different conditions still under Bata prison, where we're looking at these conditions that were so much described as deeply intended concerning to the official visit to Equatorial Guinea in that relation. Now, the visit was part of a wider Africans tour that was so much placed onto the spotlight lately into different facilities that so much associated with allegations of poor sanitation when it comes to overcrowding and human rights into the abyss. Now, including claims of different ideas that so much give different statements and mistreatments and dedications of how these political prisoners are mistreated. Now, before visiting the prison, the Pope first addressed a massive public gathering that so much attended 10,000s of groups, including the president himself. We're looking at the current president of Nigeria. We're looking at different operatives and government officials in that relation that were so much openly raised concerns about the living of conditions in the inmates, calling them an addition to what many of them described as troubling of hygienic and security into the sanitary conditions related to environment. Now, inside the prison itself, the Pope so much approximately made led and described onto different ideas to 600 inmates in delivering the message to that so much centered on human rights, justice, and rehabilitation to the tenure involving the inmates in the celebration. Now, he so much emphasized on to justice systems and different ways on how it should be done, and so much prevent on punishments, but rather resort to rebuilding lives, and so much emphasizing onto reminding prisoners that they are not so much forgotten on what is currently happening in the tenure. Now, that marks it for the Pope's visit. We're looking at different allegations that are coming in onto his direct approach to the current President Donald Trump, and this more expects on what is currently going and expectations on his last day still in Africa, as we see there in Equatorial Guinea. And finally, into the international relations, we want to conclude with Germany's interrogations and intermediacy onto the disagreements that were so much carried out, looking at Germany, Spain, and Italy into the conclusive blockage of different peers in relation to international diplomacy. Now, reports so suggest that one of the major emergency, we're looking at European Union, that have so much, we're looking at Germany, Italy have so much blocked onto the effort to suspend the block away from the cooperation of the agreement with Israel inclusive. Now, the proposal so much discussed during the meeting of the UA foreign ministers, we're looking at in Luxembourg, sought so much to either suspend the review of the UE-Israel association agreement, and rather put a framework that governs trade and political dialogue into different economic relations still between two sides. Now, the push so much underlines and gives different countries, we're looking at Spain, Ireland, and furthermore that urges Israel so much onto the violation that was put into the Article 2 of the suspension of the clause of different cooperation to respect human rights and democratic principles in that relation. However, Germany has so much strongly opposed this and given a different move on how foreign affairs should be participated. We're looking at Jen that so much given out different ways on how things should be described as a proposal that incorporates the inciting of different enmities in the concern of addressing through the political governance of UE engagement and further into the dialogue to rather suspend and give an expansion to this dialogue. Now, Italy so much plays a crucial role. We're looking at prayers and different indicators seemingly govern on how things should be run into Germany. We're looking at Italy and Israel inclusive, and that suspension still goes on. We're looking at viable reports into the tenure that will so much report on what has been the final verdict on the suspension related to Israel and furthermore engagements to Germany and European Union in that accuracy. Now, finally, we want to so much cross over to here in Uganda. We're looking at different momentums and different vows that were so much taken before Iran, and we're looking at the vows that were so much put onto the Strait of Hormuz. Different allegations come in and out, and the blockage of the current president Donald Trump. Looking at the engagement that started late February, looking at Iran, United States war and forces onto the oil prices that are so much triggered into the Gulf. Now, reports still point out onto different tensions in the Gulf that have so much escalated further. We're looking at Iran declaring itself that it will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz as long as United States Navy blocked its ports. We're looking at that remain so much a force to Iran. Now, reports that were given in the announcement suggest that different Iran's parliamentary speaker so much noted the engagement on how things should be run, and stated that the ceasefire has no meaning if Iran's military trade and different escalations still continue to be restricted. How is then Tehran urging to the blockage and further into effective undermines onto diplomatic engagement still in that relation that the progress and amounts to different economic warfare into the tenure. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most significant energy checkpoints in the world. We're looking at carrying almost 20% of global oil supply. We're looking at distributions further onto the immediacy of global consequences and further onto the current standoff of that is readily reporting to different shockwaves through the uncertainty and energy markets into international relationships, into the trade market, despite fragile escalations onto the ceasefire escalation between USA, Iran, and the situation that's still going on that tells us underground story for the different enmities still onto the retaliation to put down ceasefire ceasefire. Now, the USA Central Command has so much intensified on enforcing over the blockage and reportedly turning out onto moving more than 30 vessels into a single day from approaching Iran's port. Now, the response to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Group has so much escalated, and actions overseas reportedly on the 22nd of April still on Iran's forces that seized two vessels, looking at different ideas that are claiming on how these have violated the regulations that were so much put into the ceasefire agreement still into the port. Now, that covers it for Iran, and more developments still coming and reportedly on what is currently going on onto the ceasefire related to Iran reports into United States and Donald Trump's reaction, looking at the current president of United States on what it comes out onto the surge of the blockage. We're looking at Iran's post. Now, finally, we're looking at closing over here in Uganda. We're having different reports that have covered different ideas into the world and women developments into